over the world, and we have a number of participants online who have attended our programs in the past who are taking this as a refresher, so I'd like to welcome you all. And for those of you that haven't engaged in our organization before and this is your first time connecting, a hearty welcome to you as well. So before we get into the content of our program, I'd like to go through some logistics with you. So let's just do that now. So your host today, you have myself who is leading the webinar today. You also have our wonderful producer who is here in the room with me named Lauren Connor, who is our wonderful producer who pulls this all together and will provide some support to you. So if you have some questions related to the technology or you're having some difficulty accessing the webinar in some capacity, please just pop your comment into the question pane and Lauren will be able to respond to you. You can also email her at lauren.connor@tidalshift.ca, which was on the invitation that was sent to you with the link to the webinar. I also have one of my other colleagues online today, Linda Monk, who will introduce herself briefly in a few minutes. Linda and I have not done a webinar together in the past, though we both led many online events, and we are co-leading one coming up at the end of July for the HR Management Association in British Columbia at the end of July. So Linda is on the call today, and Linda, would you take a few moments just to introduce yourself so people know who you are?
Sure, Greg, thank you. Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to meet you all virtually. As Greg mentioned, we have worked together, and in fact we've worked together over the past 13 years on various projects, so it's exciting to enter online learning together. I do a lot of leadership coaching, and I focus on developing and delivering educational programs in topics such as stress management, resilience of course, change, leadership, burnout prevention, and organizational health. I have written and co-authored more than 20 training programs in these topic areas, and I'm really passionate about education as a way to grow. I've offered programs in various regions across Canada with a key focus in the West. I live on Salt Spring Island, which is in British Columbia between Vancouver and Victoria, and I love traveling to serve clients in various locations. So I'm glad to be here with all of you. I wish you a really valuable learning experience as Greg walks us through this important webinar on resilience. And over to you, Greg. Enjoy, everyone.
Thanks, Linda. I'm really looking forward to us co-leading at the end of July together. So I'll be waiting to talk to you after the webinar. So a couple of other logistics issues, sound and technology. So you will all be on mute, so we won't have a two-way dialogue process. What you'll also, I mentioned earlier about the technical issues, so if you're having connectivity issues, that's probably your own internet service provider, but we can certainly help you for access to the webinar. So like I said earlier, contact Lauren and she will be able to resolve those issues. You'll also notice on your screen you have a control panel, which I put a copy of one just on the screen in front of me. And you'll see where the arrow is the little hand icon. So throughout the webinar today, it is going to be interactive. There are going to be opportunities for you to ask questions, to respond to questions that I pose to you, and please use that icon there and post your responses in the question pane that is in front of you. Last but not least, since there is an online assessment usually attached to our in-class programs on resilience, I do need to mention that these programs are copyrighted and that by attending this webinar today, we aren't certifying you to deliver an assessment, which of course most of you know, but I do need to mention that, as well as this material can't be used to teach other people. This is for your information. I'm more than happy for you to share the information with folks, but again, it doesn't certify you to teach the program. So the other last piece to mention is I'm going to disconnect the video feed at this point, because what we found, because we have such a wide range of people around the world with different connectivity issues, the video feed can slow down the bandwidth so that the audio doesn't keep in sync with the video, that doesn't keep in sync with the slides. So I'm going to disconnect the video now, and you'll have an opportunity to, of course, have the audio. And this way we'll make sure everyone that's connected on the planet will be able to experience the same thing. So just give me a moment to do that, and there we go. So let's get into our content, shall we? So to help you take some notes, what I'd like for you to do is take a piece of paper in front of you, or you can use your computer screen if you'd like. And I'd like you to draw a line down the middle of the paper. And on the left-hand side of the paper, I'd like you to write the word insights. And on the right-hand side of the paper, I'd like you to write the word action. And this is for you to write down any insights you have from the session that we're going to be going through today, as well as insights are great, but they don't really do anything unless you have any action attached to them. So I want you to consider what insights you're getting today, as well as what sort of action you might take from those insights. And we'll come back to those as we go throughout our time together. So let's look at some learning objectives. So this is for our in-class session, but we're going to cover some of these today. So we do offer this program as a half-day program as well as a full-day program, and I tend to do a lot of keynotes and conference presentations on this. So learning objectives, we want you to recognize change-related disruption in work and personal settings because, of course, both of them blend together. What we're really looking at people to do is to formulate effective responses to change-related challenges, because of course we're undergoing so much change these days, and as I can see from the range of people who are on our event today, it's happening all over the planet. So it's not just in North America or Europe, but everywhere we're experiencing so much change. Also, we want to develop strategies to enhance our own resilience. And if you're a leader, whether you have direct reports or you might be a project leader where you're influencing people to get them on board, whatever you're trying to promote, we want to develop the skills to support our teams to adapt to change as we go throughout. So what I'd like you to do to set the context for where we're going with resilience is I'd like you to jot down in the question pane the answer to this question. Why can change be challenging? So why is change challenging? So jot down some responses in the question pane, and I'll read some of those out. So yeah, it's definitely uncomfortable. There's a fear of the unknown. What else? The uncertainty of the outcome, because of course we want to be able to predict the future. A lot of people mentioning fear of the unknown and the insecurity, people reacting differently, that whole ambiguity that happens, and lack of control. So there's some definite themes. Well, I love the fear of failure. Of course, none of us want to look stupid, especially at work, so that can certainly hold us back from change. And it can take us out of our comfort zone, because a lot of us want to be in the same comfort zone because we're at our most productive when we're in that zone, because we only have so much amount of energy that we can give to our day, and when we're humming along in our comfort zone, we're really at our most productive. So let me give you an example of that. So you all have probably had to deal with upgrades in technology. And I don't know about you, but I really hate when the latest version of Microsoft Word or PowerPoint comes out and they've moved all those buttons on me. And all of a sudden my productivity drops because it takes me an extra 10 minutes to do that darn document. And probably like most of you, I don't have an extra 10 minutes in my day to fiddle around learning something new when I'm usually at my most productive in my comfort zone using the old version. So all of a sudden my productivity is going to drop a little bit as I try to accomplish something new. Now, one of the other key themes, of course, is that fear of the unknown, the whole issue of status quo and reactions. And what we found is, and certainly what the research shows, is that we all want to be able to predict the future. So whether we're using psychics, tarot cards, or whether we are actually trying to understand the future plan of a document at work, we want to know what's coming. We want to know what's happening. And for a short change initiative, say something that's 2 to 3 weeks, it's really easy to see that end of 3 weeks. You can probably predict the outcome pretty easily. But for larger, more complex, longer change initiatives, let's say a 1 or 3 year organizational transformation, what you'll see is you might be able to predict the first 3 months, though you should have a plan for, of course, let's say it's a 3-year initiative. Yet the reality is, as you unroll and go through that change initiative, things are going to change. Uncertainty is going to happen. People are going to have no idea what the end of the 3 years looks like. And we want to try to predict as much around what's happening. We want to be able to manage our expectations, and we want to manage other people's expectations. So let's funnel this into a concept that will help us. So thank you all for responding to that. So a lot of very common themes. To funnel this into something that can help us understand resilience, when change causes a mismatch between our expectations, so if we expect something to happen and our perceptions around what we see happening, there's often a disconnect. So if you can expect and predict the next 3 weeks and your perception, meaning you see the 3-week project aligning with what you expect, you're happy. Now let's say you're expecting the 3-week project, as it unrolls over the next 3 weeks, but you start to see differences than what you were really expecting to happen, you're going to be unhappy. You're going to have questions that you have to try to align your expectations and your perceptions. Because you'll find as we implement change initiatives, we're always managing people's expectations, whether it's stakeholders, steering committee, staff, vendors. We're managing people's expectations as we go through the life cycle of our change initiative. And as you all noted, when we ask the question, we seek control. When our expectations don't match our perceptions, we experience that loss of control. And of course, we'll often try to adapt to change by either controlling and altering the situation or revising our expectations. And most of the time at work, I find, and certainly from the hundreds of people I've worked with, we often don't have control a lot of the changes that are happening. And we want to try to include people in those changes, whether it's through planning or through implementation or through getting their ideas, to try to help them be a little bit part of that. So let's just talk about the emotional stuff. Now, all of you are really good problem solvers, or you probably wouldn't be in your jobs. And if you're like me, you probably want to problem solve other people's emotional stuff. And for most of us aren't trained to problem solve people's emotional issues that are going on at work. There's EAP programs, there's therapists, there's people that are trained to deal with that we should refer people to. So while we can't necessarily control our emotions or other people's emotions, what we can do is manage the actions that come from our emotions. And that's where it comes to all of us who are at work to deal with that. So whether it's managing our own actions or managing other people's actions, that's where we can help problem solve. If people are having emotional issues, you can listen to them, you can acknowledge it, you can try to understand them, but unless you're really trained to, that's not really appropriate to try to problem solve emotional stuff. Now the other good news is the link between emotion and action is not hardwired. And you actually can teach the old dog new tricks. So in class, we will go obviously much more into detail to that, but just know when we're talking about resilience, we all have a standard pattern of how we tend to respond to change, yet we can actually shift that pattern and become more strategic in our response. So let's look at the definition that we're going to do, and then I'm going to have you do a little bit of a self-assessment, and then we're going to play with the characteristics, and we'll look at some scenarios, and then we're going to focus on one of the characteristics and look at some tools to build that, and that will take us to the end of our session today. So one of the reasons I really love this content around resilience, and why I really connected with Linda Hoops, who's the psychologist and researcher that informed this program, is that it's different than the traditional change models. So there are many good change models out there that we have used, and certainly that I have used. Stuff like John Cotter's model, the ProSci ADKAR model. William Bridges' Transitions, of course, is very rich. Virginia Satir, a family therapist, has done wonderful work around change and transition. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a lot of work around grief and loss when it comes to change. For those of you that are in the learning environment, of course, we have Kolb's learning cycle. These are all different models for planning and implementing change, and I think they're all good, and they all have value in different change initiatives. What none of them address is how do we increase our own capability to handle change, and how do we increase our team's capability to handle change? Because the reality is we're experiencing change on a level the planet has never experienced before. Regardless of where you are and regardless of where you work, we're undergoing high cycles of change. So how do I help my team and how do I help myself adapt to this in a way that keeps me sane and a way that keeps me productive? So let's look at this definition. So resilience is the ability to absorb high levels of disruptive change while displaying low levels of unproductive behavior. So let me give you what that means in some examples. So disruptive change is usually change that's not your idea. So when we have an idea that is about something to change, if you're sitting in a staff meeting, and you probably all sit in meetings, and you bring up an idea, you consider that a good idea if you bring it up. I mean, most of us don't want to sit around in meetings and bring up ideas that we have stupid ideas. Every idea we have we think is good, or we wouldn't bring it up. Yet when someone else brings up an idea at a meeting, unless you're 100% aligned with it, that might be considered disruptive change, because the research shows we have a different response to change initiatives that we are in control of, or changes that are our idea versus changes that are other people's idea. We have a completely different response to changes that are other people's ideas, and that's where resilience comes in. It's really looking at disruptive change, other people's ideas, changes that don't meet our expectations. Now, low levels of unproductive behavior doesn't need to mean yelling and screaming in the corner, which of course it can mean. It could mean something that I like to do when people bring up ideas that are considered disruptive. I like to shut down, and I like to disengage and not even bother with the idea. And that can really hinder my response to adapting to the change, but also being open to innovation and open to new ideas. So let's play with this definition a little bit. So here's a graph that has, or a slide that has two graphs on it. The graph that you see on the left is someone that I would consider low resilient. And if you look at it, you'll see before the disruption bar, the person's humming along in productive mode. The disruption happens, and the disruption's not the change necessarily. It's just hearing about the change could throw them into disruption. And as you can see, they are going through a lot of unproductive behavior before they get to a period of recovery. Now, there's always going to be some unproductive behavior, but that's a lot of unproductive behavior before the period of recovery. And look at that length of time. It's quite long before they recover. The change might have happened halfway through. Now, let's look at someone who's more highly resilient. So they're humming along, doing their work. The disruption happens for them a little later. There's a little bit of unproductive behavior, but if you look at their period of recovery, it's much faster than the person who would be considered more low resilience. So let's look at this in your own lives. So I would like you to think about a time when you were highly resilient. So by highly resilient, I mean a time where you had a lot of change thrown at you that was, out of your control initially, and yet you were able to get on top of it. You were able to start to adapt to it. I'd like you to type into the question pane, what attributes do you think contributed to your ability to be resilient? So take a few moments and type those in. And I'll repeat some of them out loud, of course. So let's see. I love the taking a deep breaths to manage a reaction. Optimism, think of key takeaways. Willingness and confidence, having that positive outlook and being flexible. A lot around optimism I'm seeing. I love the idea of patience, which is something I often lack. Oh, yes, absolutely. Willingness to take ownership that the disruption happened and not ignore it. Damn, I like ignoring those. Staying calm. Yes, I always think often of the person that is really resilient as the person who's standing at the eye of the hurricane. And I've seen some, regardless of their job position, but I'm thinking of someone I know who's a VP, that all the crap is hitting the fan, and they're able to stay really calm and patient, maintain that positive outlook, keep their eyes on the horizon, as I'm seeing, and looking at the ability to be persistent and move on. Staying professional, of course, and sometimes that can get difficult. And here's a great comment, thinking of the context going around that's not just about you, but the other stuff going on. And I often find that hard during disruptive change is to get out of my tactical thinking mindset and lift up my thinking to be more strategic, so that we start thinking about not just our own reaction, but what are all the impacts that are going on. Taking that step back before moving forward. Of course, we want to be able to take that step back, analyze the situation, compartmentalize things, making sure that they work, looking for that silver lining. And sometimes it takes a while to get to the silver lining. I've worked with people over the years, and to give you a concrete example, if you make a decision to leave your job, you're going to be very in control of that, and you may have another job to go to, you might have some plans in place. However, if the organization you work for makes a decision for you to leave your job, you're going to have a very different response, and it's going to be hard to look for the silver lining at that moment. You might not see the silver lining for 6 months, and yet eventually, and this is what most of the change models show, of course, we come out to the other side. We just want to be conscious about when we're actually applying that ability to look for the silver lining and the positive outlook. So a lot of other comments, I think I've mentioned most of them. I'm just going to mention a few. Engaging with others. Some people can certainly take a step back and feel like they are on their own and may find it very difficult to actually engage with others. So absolutely, that's key. So let's funnel this into the 7 characteristics. There's so much wisdom from the people on this webinar, and you're going to be able to see how your wisdom funnels into this content. So let's have a look at that. Now I'm going to go through each of these, and as we go through these, I'd like for you to take a moment to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low and 5 being high. So there are 5 characteristics that actually break down into 7, and you will see these reflected over the next few slides. So I'm going to go through each of these one by one with different slides, and I'm going to have you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. So the 5 that break down are positive world and positive self. We've got focused. We've got flexible thoughts and flexible social. We have the ability to be organized and the ability to be proactive. And this comes from some very solid research. So it wasn't made up by some consultant sitting in the corner, but you'll see how your wisdom really fits into this. So for the first one, we're going to look at the positive characteristic, and it breaks down into 2. So positive is looking at how you engage your energy in the challenge rather than retreating from it. And the first one we want to look at is positive world. So the reason it's positive world is actually looking outwards at the challenge, at disruptive change. Now remember, we're looking at disruptive change here, not change that you're in control of. So you're going to most likely have a different response to disruption versus changes that you have in control. There's sometimes some, bleed over between the two, but what I've found, and certainly what the research tends to show, is that we often have different responses when it's other people's ideas. So think about this in the context of disruptive change and put yourself in those shoes. So in the terms of positive world, people with higher scores in positive world, when disruptive change happens, they tend to be very optimistic, and they tend to be the type of person that is able to look for the opportunity given the negative event. And I work with someone who has a very high score in this, and so what will happen in a meeting when there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, she'll be one of the first people there to say, let's look at the opportunity there. And she'll be very persistent about trying to find where the opportunity is. Now, I tend to have a very low score in positive world, and so what that means is during disruptive change, I can withdraw really easily. I become very pessimistic, and by pessimistic I don't mean necessarily negative, though I can be. I mean skeptical. So when disruptive change happens, I'll immediately become quite skeptical about how good is this change, and I'll be focused on the dangers. I'll want to manage the risks, and as I mentioned earlier, I can give up a little easily. And it takes me a while sometimes to overcome that disruption. So I want you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, where you think you might fall. So let's go to the next one. So positive self, low scores in positive self, that you see where my cursor is, they're the type of people that may not feel they have the knowledge, skill, and capability to handle the disruptive change at that point. They can give up as well. There are also might be the type of folks that during disruptive change might have a real fear of failure. In terms of, I'm really worried about how this is going to look, I don't want to fail. There could be that going on for them. People with higher scores in positive self tend to look at failures as learning opportunities versus people with low scores who really get stuck in that failure and make it very pervasive. So people with high scores are very persistent. They're not afraid to step into disruption because of how they'll look. If they do fail, they'll try to learn from it. So think about this in terms of disruption, and I want you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being low, 5 being high, and you can use decimal points. The next characteristic we want to look at is our ability to be focused. And our ability to be focused means our ability to direct our energy towards the most important goals rather than getting scattered or diffusing it across too many. Now, while all of you are focused in your day-to-day work, or you wouldn't probably be employed, during disruption, do you have a different response? So during disruptive change, are you the type of person that can take on a little too much? Are you someone that says, everything's a priority? Because if everything's a priority, it means nothing's a priority. Priorities, by definition, mean the top 3 things in your list are a priority. and you might get a little scattered. And you probably learned in your career, if you have a lower score in this, that when you get stuck, it's probably because you need to figure out, what are my priorities? So that would be someone with a lower score. Someone with a higher score during disruptive change, they can be like a laser beam, and they can cut through all the stuff, all the data, everything that's going on around them, and they can see what the clear priorities are. They can prioritize very easily, and they're clear about what needs to get done first. I have about a mid-range score on this. So rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. And you can use decimals. The next one we want to look at is our ability to be flexible, and that's about opening ourselves up to a wide range of possibilities, which is flexible thoughts, and resources, which is flexible social. So let's look at flexible thoughts first. So low scores in flexible thinking, they can be the type of person that during disruptive change becomes a black and white thinker. It's either this way or it's this way. It's got to be this or this. And it's really about, I'm going to do one option at a time, and you know what, I'd rather just stick with what's familiar. Whereas people with high scores with flexible social, they're able to play in the gray areas. So they'll often be both and thinkers. So when disruption happens, they'll be immediately open to options. Now again, you might be like this in your day-to-day job. When disruption happens, do you have a lower score? But if you have a high score in this, when disruption happens, one of the first things you might do is step out and look at options, be open to creativity, to innovation, to new ideas. So rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being low and 5 being high. The next one we have is flexible social. So flexible social, if flexible thoughts is about looking at options, flexible social is about accessing resources. So people with high scores in flexible social, and this is my highest score, when disruptive change happens, they tend to immediately step out and seek help. They seek what others have to offer, and they immediately start collaborating. And that's one of the first things I do with any type of disruption. I start talking to people. People with low scores in flexible social tend to need to figure it out on their own first. They tend to want to retreat into solitude. They want to figure it out first before they engage others. Sometimes they might find it difficult to delegate, and sometimes they might feel they have to do it themselves. So in disruptive change, if you're the type of person that says, you know, I just got to work this out on my own, I don't want to delegate to anybody, I'm the one that can do it best, if I delegate it might slow down, you might have a lower score in this. So rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. The next one we have is organized. Now, organized doesn't mean your ability to pile and file. Organized is your ability to apply structure and discipline to your thinking rather than working unsystematically. So this is one of my lowest scores. Even though I'm a very organized person in my day-to-day job, and I love systems, and I like process, and I'm a list maker, when disruptive change happens, I tend to start shifting approaches frequently. I'll get very impatient with details. So if it's my idea, I actually get into the details, but if it's your idea, I become very impatient. I'm like, okay, I just want to figure this out. I don't want to all those details. I just want to get going. And I'll keep the structures in my head. So people will ask me, well, what's going on? How are you handling this? I'm like, got it under control. Don't worry about it. I'm also not the first person who, during disruptive change, is going to get up at the flip chart or the whiteboard and draw a process map or structure the data. So people with high scores with the organized characteristics, they'll often be those people who, during disruptive change, where they're like, let's map this out. Let me put some structure around this data. I need to see it. I need to get into the details. I want to get it out of my head onto paper. So that would be a high score. So rate yourself where you think you might fall on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being low, 5 being high, and you can use decimals. Last but not least, we want to look at our ability to be proactive. Now, our ability to be proactive is our ability to experiment with action in the face of uncertainty rather than holding back until everything is clear. So, high scores in proactive. When disruptive change happens, they want to get into action right away. They're often focused on possibilities. They'll be seeking excitement. So if you're the type of person that when disruptive change happens, you immediately want to take some action, and you don't need to have everything all worked out, then you probably have a higher score in this. People with low scores in proactive, and I have a low score in this, tend to be very cautious. So when disruptive change happens, we're like, okay, what's going on? We get very focused on the risks, and we're worried about what we're going to lose. Now, my day-to-day job, I'm very much a risk taker and like lots of action, so I love taking risks. But if it's someone else's idea or a change I disagree with or a change I'm uncertain of, my feet go into the ground and I don't take action. So rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 as to where you think you might fall. Now I'm going to show you a few slides just so you can get into gear and apply some of this information. I'm going to show you a few images on the following slides where expectations might be disruptive, and I want you to, the first one we're going to do is a poll around which of the resilience characteristics might be most helpful to this adaptation process. So let's say you're driving along and you have an important appointment to get to, or you're getting to work, and you were not expecting this traffic. So the reason I say not expecting is because you'd have a different response if you're expecting it. But we're talking about disruptive change. So you're not expecting the traffic, you've got somewhere to go, there's probably an accident later up on the freeway, so the traffic's backed up. Based on this poll that's coming up, I want you to click on what would be the first thing you might do to respond to this situation. So Lauren, do you want to pop that poll up, and then I'll read out some of the results. The numbers are coming in. They're keeping coming. So I'll tell you the ones that I'm seeing in the lead right now. Now, none of these are the wrong response, by the way. This is just probably how you might respond to disruptive change. So the highest one that we have right now is looking for an alternative route. So those are the types of folks that when disruptive change will happen, we'll try to look for alternatives. So that would be flexible thoughts. They're out looking for different options. They want to try something else. So the poll is closed now. So we've got 63%, and I think you can see that on your screen. 63% of people would look for an alternative route, meaning that would be the flexible thinking. I love that 26% of you that would relax, turn the music up, sit back and enjoy. And of course, that's positive world. I'm just going to roll with this. I'm going to look for the opportunity here. And of course, I have a lower score in positive world. So for those of you that are the 3% and swear and hit the steering wheel in exasperation, that would certainly be me. And that would be my natural response. And of course, if I wanted to take action, I'd have to kick myself out of that. And of course, that 4% phone someone would be our flexible social, so that ability to reach out. And the 3% around getting frustrated and veering off to the nearest exit, that's really proactive because you're taking a risk, you're taking some action, and you want to try something else. So good work on that. Let's look at our next scenario. So you're another driving scenario, and what I want you to do this time is to write down the characteristics you would use to handle this, just one characteristic into the question pane. So we went through 7 of them. Think about which ones you would use. So let me just set the context. You're driving along. You did not expect to see this sign. It was not on your GPS. It was not on your map. You did not know it was here, and bam, you encounter this sign at a stop sign. What might you do in this situation to handle the disruption. So type in some of your responses to the question pane, and I'll read some of those out. Okay. Let's just see, we've got tons coming in. Carry on in the line I'm in. Figure it out. I love the response to that, ugh, and figure it out. Follow the road already. Take one and circle around, and of course that is proactive. Focused, absolutely. We'd want to prioritize and be clear about what lane I'm in. If you're not clear about what lane you're in, it's going to be really difficult for you to take action. And I love that emotional sense. Oh, this is a surprise. That's a really nice positive world response. For my low positive world, I would, again, hit the steering wheel. Here's a response. I just go straight. I can always go back if needed. And that's very much proactive. I'm really willing to take that risk. So if you're willing to take action and not worry about the outcome, if it comes back and try again, that's very much proactive. And then, of course, you have look for the alternate route. Oh, I'd call someone and see where to go or roll down my window. So that's flexible social. Absolutely. Here's one, and again, I'm thank you for your optimism. I chuckle and continue on. And here's someone that's using the organized characteristic. If you're not in the right lane, you assess the situation, see if you can switch to the right, figure out where I'm going to go and how I'm going to get there. So that's the organized characteristic. Great ones. Let's look at the next one. So this is you. You're motoring along in a wheelchair. You didn't expect to see these stairs. All of a sudden you encounter them. So again, in the question pane, what might you do in this situation? Ask for help. So there's flexible social. Look for alternatives. There's flexible thinking. Look for help. Ask for help. Finding alternate route. Flexible thinking. Look for another route. I like someone admitted to swearing. Thank you for that. That's probably what I would do. So you can see that low positive world can leave us stuck sometimes. And someone's willing to use proactive and just try going up those. And you can actually go up these stairs backwards because of the grade and the slope of the stairs. You can actually go up these backwards. So you can see different situations often require us to use different characteristics. And of course, we all have a standard response around these, and what we want to do is try to be a little more strategic in our response so that when we do encounter disruption, we pick and choose our response instead of always defaulting to our natural reaction. And that's really natural. I mean, you're not going to be strategic 100% of the time, yet sometimes we have to be. So we're going to look at one thing that we can do to actually build the characteristics. So we're going to look at positive world because I want you to have a tool to take away with you. So obviously, if we were in our half-day session or if we were in our keynote or doing the full-day program, we'd be working through a bunch of different tools. But for our purposes on the webinar today, we're going to focus on this one. Now, the reason we focus on this one is because of the fact that positive world, because it's how you view the disruptive change, is often the one where we can get stuck easiest or where our teams and the people we work with can get stuck, where we end up very focused on how problematic the change is, which is fine, you want to do that, but eventually you got to kick out of that and figure out, well, how are we going to deal with the change? Because eventually we have to deal with it. We have to get unstuck. So just to remind you, out of the 7 characteristics, this is the first one that we looked at, positive world. And remember, low scores in this can be very pessimistic when it comes to, and just skeptical when it comes to disruptive change. And higher scores can be people that are more looking at the opportunity when disruptive change. So let's just talk about how it applies your energy. We haven't talked about this yet we all have a certain amount of energy that we contribute to disruptive change. And if we don't apply positive world, we can get stuck in worry, in rumination, in avoiding issues. Whereas when we do apply it, we can kick ourselves out of that worry mode, and we can get into productive problem-solving activity, which is, of course, what we want to do. And you're not always going to be able to do that, but we want to try to do it as much as possible. So let's look at this simple skill, and this is something that you can use with yourself or use it with your teams of people you work with, or you can use it with your kids. It's a wonderful skill that will get you kicked out of a low positive world response, and this is what I have used to change my responses. So let's walk through this, and then we'll play with it for a bit in our last 15 minutes together. So when you encounter disruption, you generate explanations that tend to influence our feelings and actions. So something bad happens, or even sometimes good, and we decide why it happens. And that's our explanation. Now, our explanations can be pessimistic or optimistic. And the definition for pessimistic explanations is not negative. So just as someone's pessimistic doesn't mean they're negative. What it means is this. Pessimistic explanations for negative events tend to focus on broad-based, long-lasting reasons and can be very pervasive. So something small and bad happens, and all of a sudden, everything is bad. Whereas optimistic explanations for negative events, they tend to focus on more specific and short-term reasons. They're not as pervasive. And again, these come to mind very quickly, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about them. Most of the time we tend to jump to conclusions, and yet sometimes we need to unpack that. So let's look at an example here. Your boss yells at you and tells you that the report you sent him was awful. Here's me, my natural pessimistic explanation. He's stupid and incompetent. And that's a very broad, long-lasting reason, which is probably not true. A more optimistic explanation might be, which is more short-term and specific, he's having a bad day. And this isn't about a mind flip, and it's not about positive thinking. This is about being more realistic in our response. It's about grounding yourself in reality versus something that's not true or real. When we stay stuck in pessimistic explanations, it can make us hard to come up with responses, while optimistic explanations can suggest next steps. So let's look at another example. Which of the explanations below is more optimistic and which is pessimistic? So just think about this yourself. You're driving to work and you get a flat tire. Explanation A, that was bad luck. I must have driven over a nail and not seen it. Explanation B, the quality of government employees is awful. Look what a lousy job the highway maintenance people are doing leaving debris on the highway. Now, as you can see from this, the more broad-based, pervasive one is explanation B, because it's saying the quality of government employees is awful. Now, that's not probably true for everybody and everything. The reality is you probably just drove over a nail or went through a pothole, and that's why that has done that. So let's look at the next activity that we're going to do. So what I'd like for you to do is this. In the question box in front of you, I want you to write down what goes through your head when I read this statement. So I'm going to read this out loud, and I don't want you to overthink this. I want you just to write in the question pane what comes to mind when I say this. So here's the scenario, and this is you. You're standing in the hallway talking to 3 of your coworkers. Your boss comes up to you and says, I need to see you in my office right away. Write down in the question pane what goes through your head. And I'll read some of them out loud. Oh, I love these that are coming in. What did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? I'm in trouble. I'm freaking out. I'm in trouble. So those I'm in troubles, what have I done something wrong, are very much a low positive world response, and of course, that's where I go to. So when my boss, Brian, says to me, I need to see you in my office, I immediately go to what have I done wrong? Now, the reality is this. Let's just ground this in reality. If every time my boss talked to me I had done something wrong, I would not be in my job. And I can say that for you. If every time your boss talked to you that you've done something wrong, then you're probably not going to be employed that long. Oftentimes, our positive world response are not grounded in a realistic response. So let's look at more optimistic responses. I wonder what they need. I'm just going to read some of these out. I wonder what they need. What's going on? That leaves you more open to options. Do I have an opportunity to help? This guy's not polite. Yeah, that would be an emotional response for sure. It must be important. Wonder what he wants. I like the uh-oh. That's sort of in the middle. It's sort of leaning towards the more pessimistic, but it's still leaving you a little open compared to what I have, which is, what have I done wrong? So number of people. So you can see just by reading these out loud, there's some people on the spectrum that have more low positive world response and some people that have more a high positive world response. And when we look at the different responses, we want to try to kick those of us who have that lower response around immediately going to the pessimistic response. We need to kick out of that because 9 times out of 10, you haven't done something wrong. So let's look at some questions to help you or your team get out of a pessimistic response. So is there an alternative explanation? So for most of us that have a lower positive world response around, did I do something wrong? I'm going to get fired. I can't believe how awful he is. What have I done wrong? Most likely there's an alternative explanation. The one I'll tend to use is there good evidence to support this? Again, you want to ground people into the evidence around what's really happening. So again, most of us have a natural response to things, and for those of you that had a low positive world, and for those of you that even had a high positive world response, there's people you work with that immediately go, what have I done wrong? Most likely there's not good evidence to support this. Because if there was evidence to support this, if every time your boss talked to you, you'd done something wrong, you probably wouldn't be in your jobs. Sometimes we can allow one experience where your boss did call you into your office once because you've done something wrong to cloud our future, and it can be pervasive. And most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it's not true. And it's about determining what is the evidence, what are the facts, details, and data that I'm basing this response on. It almost becomes laughable. Is there a more realistically optimistic viewpoint? Is there a more short-term specific viewpoint? Does X have to lead to Y? So does having my boss call me into his office mean I've done something wrong? Not necessarily. It almost becomes laughable. I'm actually open to having a different dialogue if I don't go in thinking I've done something wrong. And sometimes during negative events, we have to stop thinking what we're thinking at that moment and just deal with it and come back to it later. And these are all powerful questions that you can use to change people's skeptical, pessimistic response. The pessimistic response might be really real, so it doesn't mean it's bad, but eventually we have to snap out of it to figure out how we are going to deal with the situation. So again, try to apply these in ways when you see people using absolutes, words like always, never, no one, everyone. So if you have kids that come home from school, everybody hates me, nobody likes me, you can use one of these questions. There must be an alternative here. Are there some people at your school who like you? Yes. You want to find out who they are. Whenever you encounter those always, never, those words that are absolutes, we want to really determine, is there evidence to support this? Are they really always like that? So I had a woman come up to me. I did a big keynote last March at a conference. I had a woman come up to me after the session and said to me, Greg, I'm always negative. How can I be more positive? And I said to her, you're not always negative. There are times when you're positive. What's going on for you then? People aren't always a certain way all the time. So if you're a leader or a coach, you want to try to look for those exceptions to kick people into gear while acknowledging their response. Again, we're not talking about shaming people or making them wrong. We're talking about grounding them in the evidence and the data and trying to move them up that score. Because once you move up that positive world, you can get into the change quicker. So in class, we actually do a sample profile, and people complete an online profile beforehand. So this is an example of the different characteristics at the bottom with different scores. Everybody's will look a little different. Of course, for our purposes, I had us do a self-assessment, so you're able to rate yourself where you might fall. And to wrap us up, what I'd like for you to do is go back to the sheet that we started with an hour ago, where I had you writing down any insights and actions that you'd like to take. And I'd like you to jot down on that sheet, and you can also put this in the question pane. What can you take away from today and put into practice? So what was valuable today from our online event that we can put into practice? So take a few moments to jot that down. What can you take away and put into practice? Yeah, seeking optimistic explanations, that's something that I do. I am one of those people with that low positive world that when I travel in traffic, I used to be the person that would swear at everyone because they were intentionally cutting me off. And I realized that that had a large impact on the people that would encounter me, whether it's at meetings or at work, after the session. And I realized I had to change that. So I started to look for alternative explanations. Were people really intentionally cutting me off? Clearly no. Try to be more positive. Yeah, so remember, being positive isn't about roses and lollipops and sunshine and rainbows. It's about grounding ourselves in the evidence. It's about being realistically optimistic. Absolutely, looking at different skills. One of the things I've really found is doing this work over the years and with the hundreds of people I've worked with is that if we pick something too complicated to work on, we won't do it. And we really want to pick something simple to work on to put into practice. And it's these simple skills that you do on the day-to-day basis that will make the biggest difference in your career. You'll find that if you think about bosses that you've had, colleagues you've worked with, you might like them because they're smart and they do their job. But what you really resonate with them about is what are their interactions like with people? How do they interact with others? And the interactions that you have with people on a day-to-day basis will have the biggest impact on your career. It's not the budgets and frameworks and so on and plans. Those are all important, but it's how you engage with those. So I encourage you to pick something simple to work on and put it into practice. Treat hassles as exercise. It's a great way to practice building your resilience skills. That way when something business critical comes along, you'll have easier access to it. And the research shows that if you build these up during small, simple situations, that when the big stuff hits the fan, you'll be able to easily access those change muscles. So a couple of things to remember. You all have a standard pattern of how you respond to disruptive change. Just being aware of that pattern will help you increase your capability. The beauty of awareness is that it breaks that pattern. Think about the resilience characteristics and how you can use them. Try simple skills to build them. My email is on this slide. Feel free to reach out with any questions or comments. I'm more than happy to respond if you're interested in either a keynote at a conference presentations, or our half-day and full-day program. Our website's there for us to keep in touch. You can also follow us on Twitter which is at Tidal_Shift. And there'll be a short survey coming out soon if you wouldn't take a short moments to complete that for us. Otherwise, thank you everyone for having you today. It's been a pleasure to having our returning participants as well as having the new folks that have engaged with us for a first time. So again, thank you all, and I wish you all the greatest day no matter where you are on the planet. Goodbye.